James Boxhall, and we're at Hagley.
What's your business name?
Just Hedgelayer, but it used to be Sticks and Stones when we were doing a bit of dry stone walling as well. So,
what do you love about what you do?
get out in lovely weather such as this, freezing cold. No, I like working with the hedges. Yeah, just all the tools, axes and bill hooks and things. Like working with timber, and yeah, it's good.
How did you get into it?
I always knew about hedge laying because we had a pretty big hedge laying scene in Tassie right up to the sort of 1950s and 60s before it fell well and truly by the wayside. And then I did a little bit on a farm where I worked at. The boss there, so there were some old tools there. The boss said, oh yeah, they belonged to the hedge layer that used to work on the farm there, and he'd give me a bit of a rundown about it. And I knew from just distant memories about it. And then I had a bloke came out from Shropshire 4 or 5 years later, and he came out, was brought into a farm at Chudley, and I worked with him there for a few years, and worked with him for a couple of years, and then worked on the farm there for about probably 6 years, I think, stalking the hedges there. Yeah.
So how long do you think you might have been doing this?
I've been doing this full time. I've been doing it for about 25 years.
Yeah.
Don't get run over by this tractor. Yeah. And yeah, full time I've been doing it for 20 years full time, I guess. And then, yeah, I mean, when I was 7 and 18, we were planting hedges and things like that as well. So just went on from there.
Can you explain the process a bit? It
is hard to explain. I'm sure you'll be able to. There's better descriptions with pictures, obviously. So the idea is you take the hawthorn hedges that you see around the district, especially around Hagley here, and once they're about 12 or 15 feet tall, they're usually been let go and they're knocked stock proof. And the idea is you're cutting them down, but you're not cutting them completely off. You're leaving about 10 or 15% thereabouts, and you're laying them over, one on top of the other in the line of the hedge. And the idea is to create a stock-proof barrier and basically bring the hedges back into a working condition, rather than just, most people think they look good, but rather than just having them looking good, they're in a working condition where they're actually doing the job that they were planted for. In 1804, Tassie, sort of early Tassie settlement, or white Tassie settlement, they were the original fences. And there was no wire fences was 80 or 90 years into the future, so we nearly had 100 years in early Tasmania where there was no wire fences. All you could do was either have hawthorn hedges, dry stone walls, or post and rail fences, really. So that's why these sort of fertile plains around Hagley and Deloraine and places like that, there's just hundreds of kilometres of hawthorns.
Is there any other type of tree that you can use besides hawthorn?
There's around Evandale and White Hills. There's another species called blackthorn, which is the sloe, which is where they make sloe gin from, the berries of the sloe tree, and they use that predominantly. That's sort of 80 to 90% of the hedges around there are actually blackthorn hedges, but most of the hedges are hawthorn just because they're the best for the job that they were planted to do. So they're a very thorny plant, so that's good for a stock-proof barrier. And when you cut them, they respond very well to being cut. As ridiculous as it sounds being a tree, but they actually say hawthorns love the axe. So the more you cut them, the more they grow. And anyone that's ever tried to cut them and thinking that's it, they've killed them, and turn their back and then turn around and next thing they've grown back up again. Yeah, they respond really well to the work we do, to the hedge laying that we do with them. So.
Can you talk a little bit about the timeline? So you said when they are about 12 to 15 feet tall, you start doing some of the work.
Yeah, so they're cut and laid. The original early settlers would have planted the hedge, protected it as best they could, got it to that 12, 15 feet tall height, laid it, and then it's trimmed for sort of 20 or 30 years. And again, responding really well to that trimming regime, it thickens it up as well. And then it's, for that next 20 or 30 years, it's trimmed and it's stock proof. And then as the hedge slowly gets a bit thin at the bottom, then you just stop, you keep trimming the sides, stop trimming the top and let it grow up to 12, 15 feet tall again, and then you lay it again. So all these hedges here, this is nothing new that we're doing to them. It's just they're a bit out of the cycle that they would have been in. We're laying, trim for 30 years, then lay it again. they're out of that cycle. So the last time the hedges here would have been laid, most of them would have been laid in about the 1920s, and some might have been laid around sort of the 1950s. A farmer pulled up here the other day and said about his mother and grandfather. He remembered they used to lay hedges over on a nearby property. Yeah, but most of the hedges here haven't seen this sort of for probably 60 or 70 years. Occasionally though you do see some of the trees that you can see where we've laid it over, where it's been laid over 50 or 60 years ago, and the tree actually grows, has a big diagonal growth in it where you can clearly see, and sometimes you even see the axe mark. You can clearly see the axe mark where the hedge layer 50 or 60 years ago was working on the hedge. So yeah.
Do you often work with helpers?
I used to have someone full-time work. I'd labour on his dry stone walling jobs of the summertime. You can only lay the hedges of the winter time, March through to August, September, and then once the sap starts running you've got to pull up because the bark can kink out the front of it. But I laboured on his dry stone walling jobs of the summertime, and he laboured on my hedge laying jobs of winter time. So mostly I do it by myself, and I've got a helper here today, but yeah, mostly it's just by myself, which is okay. I can put my own music on the speaker then and not have to worry about anyone else's tastes.
Have you had memorable moments or things that really stand out?
Yeah, finding some of the things you find in the hedges. We always jokingly, and from an archaeological point of view, the hedges were just the rubbish tip of the farm. If a farmer's walking along and he picks up whatever he picks up, if it's to be discarded, he just throws it into the nearest hawthorn hedge. So you do actually find, obviously you find a lot of rubbish, but I remembered down at Campbelltown laying a hedge down there, and on the big hedges the first cuts with a chainsaw. And as I was cutting down through the hedge down close to ground level, threw out a heap of sparks and I blunted the chain. But anyway, having a scratch around there was it would have been a rabbit trap, but it was in a dog trap style, so 2 handles out each side, not just your standard rabbit trap. But I thought, oh beauty, it was quite an old trap, and I managed to cut that out of the hedge. And then I got back on and was laid the next couple of trees over, and as I looked up to cut a branch, and there was the trap hoe sat up in the branch that had grown into the branch, and the handle had all rotted out, so he'd obviously scratched around to make the hole for the trap and then hung the hoe up in the tree, and for whatever reason that was the last time they got used, never came back. And I often think, did he then get the call up to go to the war or something like that? That could have been the last sort of times so that stuff like that is really interesting. I often think of that actually, how it was the whole story. There was the trap and there was the trap hoe hung up in the hawthorns. Yeah.
Interesting. What are your plans for the future? Keep doing?
Keep going until these hedges, these big hedges, are hard on your body. Like you've got to really, it's hard on your hamstrings. I find them hard. You're really pulling to get them down, and the actual weight of them as you're lowering them down they're quite heavy. Yeah, but I really enjoy working with them. Here on the road, especially here on the road, so a lot of people pull up and have a bit of a yak and sort of try and get a bit done while people are talking to us. I enjoy doing it. Plus, the materials that we bring to the site, the stakes and the binders, they're the native hazel, the dogwoods that grow up in the forest. So probably sometimes we try and get a fair bit before the hedge laying season, but inevitably we end up running out, and so we usually end up having one day, a fortnight up in the bush, sort of getting stakes and binders to bring to the hedge anyway. So it gives us a little bit of a break from that as well. So it's all round. It is an interesting job. Work with the chainsaws and timber, and obviously all the bill hooks and all the tools and things. Yeah, and I'll go around. Not only here, go to Victoria and work on some jobs there, and there's a big farm up in New South Wales where I've been going for the last 12 years, I think, every year, to do 3 or 4 weeks at a time up there. So it's just a good look around. Yeah,
plenty happening.
Yeah.
Going back to the stake, so why is that wood used as a stake?
So it's a nice hard wood. It's
dogwood.
Yeah, so it's a dogwood. So inevitably anything that gets used for this, doesn't matter where it is in the world, because they lay hedges all around the world, and anywhere, whatever species they use just ends up getting called hazel, because the English hazelnut hazel has historically been used for the stakes and the binders, but it's our hazel is the dogwood is a very hard, reasonably slow growing for the size of it. Most of the stakes we're using here are probably between 12 and 15 years old, so they're for the size of them, they are quite a dense timber, so they're really good for the stakes. The binding that we use on this style of hedging is not, the binding's not as good as the English proper hazel binding. The hazel is quite a very versatile. It's super supple and bendy, the traditional hazel, and you can bend it at right angles and then let it go, and it'll actually hold that right angle shape for a little bit before it slowly. So that's, whereas our bind, the dogwood that we use, the binding is quite hard and not brittle, but quite doesn't like being bent as much.
Sounds like it's harder work.
It's hard,
actually.
Yeah, it is harder work. You've got to keep your visor down because inevitably if it happens to flick off over a stake, you'll whack you in the nose quite quickly. So you keep your visor down when you're doing it.
Yeah,
so,
fair.
Yeah.
Do you obviously work with quite sharp tools and chainsaws and whatnot?
Yeah.
Safety obviously is paramount.
Yeah.
Have you had any close calls?
I've had one. You do have. The worst thing is the thorns. So the knee pads come into play because you're kneeling down all the time, scratching around under the hedge, and when you're actually doing the main cut, which is the pleach, quite often you're kneeling down, and I did kneel on a thorn which went straight into my knee, and that was very knees are very tender spots I discovered. And then I've only ever had one close call in wet weather. I was explaining earlier that the leather gloves that we wear and the mitts that we wear, which are proper hedging mitts, obviously being wintertime work, when all the leather gets wet from the rain, things get a bit slippery, and I have had a billock twist in my hand a bit as I went to knock it, cut through the glove and into my thumb. But anyway, luckily I haven't had any. I just try and be very careful. I've got kids, I want to be coming home safe and sound at the end of the day, so I just try and be very careful. The worst thing here on this hedge is we're working on the side of the road, and I do feel for road workers now, because some of these, there's a 60km/h sign up there, and some of these cars are coming screaming past here doing over 100 k's an hour, and they just won't slow down. Now, the local traffic's really good, the farmers and everything, the tractor that went past, they keep well away from us, and there's spud trucks driving around at the moment. They're really good, but just occasionally gets some
very enthusiastic.
Yeah, enthusiastic. Early morning too. Like we're here at 6:30 in the morning, and when it's just getting light, putting the road signs up, and people are just flying past. And, anyway.
You talked a little bit about how far you can do in a day, or how much you can do in a day.
Yeah,
it depends on the hedge.
Yeah, it does depend. Yeah.
Ballpark again. Can you talk a bit about how far you can do? Weather dependent, hedge dependent.
It is mainly hedge dependent. Ideally on real big old hedges, and it's mainly you've got to use, the wood is older and more brittle, and you've just got to take things a bit slower to make sure you get them down. There's a lot more digging. We might actually dig right down and sever roots and things like that as we're laying it over, rather than just having the cut out of the ground. And so the bigger hedges, because just a bit more touchy, not as good to lay them over. It might be 8 or 10 metres a day. Then the problem with this hedge is wood is laying really well. The wood's nice and the timber's nice and rubbery, and it's holding on really well. But there's a lot of wire that's grown into the hedge from, looks like war wire, so 1940s onwards. So it's just slowing us down. We're either blunting the chain or having to cut in and around the wire in the wood itself, and then we've got to spend time going along just with an angle grinder, cutting the wire out, and the pliers, pulling it out and things like that. So that does slow us down, and it all goes back to hedges being out of that 30-year laying cycle. If laying a hedge every 30 years, you could easily do they always talked about doing a cricket pitch a day, 22 yards. And you could do that if the hedges had been laid 30 years ago, but because this hedge wasn't laid probably for 60 or odd years, it's a lot bigger. Then you've got where they put the wire in. Rather than lay it, they've just tacked some wire along it, which has inevitably grown in. Yeah. On some of the hedges that we've planted, we plant a lot of hedges, and those ones we're doing sort of 25-30 metres a day sometimes.
So is that just planting the trees?
Yeah, so the trees are planted, then we come back in 8 years' time and lay it. So when the hedge is that 12-15 feet tall that I talked about.
What distance between the plants does one?
Is apart, so it's
Yeah.
5 plants to the metre.
Okay. Okay, that's
So
close. Is that behind? Did you plant those?
no, so yeah, that's the same planting. That's the farmers here. They planted that hedge.
Yeah.
Historically, all these hawthorns were planted at 5 to a metre, 8 inches
Okay.
apart, which seems like a lot. For 100 metres of hedge, you need 500 plants.
Oof, yeah.
But it's to do with keeping. It's basically because the hedges were the fences of the day, and it's like trying to go only use. You've got 13 strand wire fences. It'd be like saying, "Oh, I can get away with 6 strands or 4 strands to keep my stock in." So it's just the same thing. It's just doing the job. It's making sure that they were doing the job properly and planting them nice and dense, so that the hedge layer in 30 years' time had plenty to work with. You might get the odd one that does die or something like that, and you've still got plenty to lay over.
Favourite part of the Meander Valley?
Meander, Meander. I grew up at Meander, so my family's back to the 1800s, and we spent a lot of time on the mountain, up around the Ironstone and places like that. Had all my ancestors hunted and trapped up there and things like that, so we get up there quite regularly. We've got a family track up the mountain, and so that's probably my favourite part, I think.